So we have this running with the lines, and now we want to have a look at how can we restructure our code a little bit. Well, the first thing I see is that we have this calculation twice here. So we can create a function to calculate the position. And what do we need? Well, we need the event to get the client X and client Y off of the event. And we also need the element. Here we always use the canvas, but in the end that offset left and offset top exists on any HTML element. So we can just declare it as element. So we would have something like that. Function get mouse position, and we want to have the event and the element. Okay. And the position would then be x of event.client x minus element.offset left. And the y would be event.client y minus element.offset top. And then we can just return the position. And then we have the same functionality. Okay. And here we would have to pass in the event, which in our case would just be E. So we can pass in E. And then we also want to pass in our element, which in our case is the canvas. Like that. Same thing down here. We can say our position is just this, the result of this function. Now we have some data which is related to mouse, and we just have it out here in the void as normal variables. So what I would do next is I would group it. So I could create an object, and I can have a property on it is pressed and set it to false, and down to null. So that is the position where we press down, and that is if we are pressing the button currently. Then we would have to exchange this here to mouse is pressed equals true. Let's see where else do we have a look at is pressed. Here we will also have mouse is pressed equals fails, and mouse is pressed like that to check if it is currently being pressed. Let's save that. Still working. Next up, we want to change the down. So mouse.down, we want to save it on our mouse object. Well, where would we do that? Here. Mouse down position would be now mouse.down, and we would have to change it everywhere where we use mouse down, which is in here, and then down here as well, mouse down. Now we have that functionality. Okay, now we should be able to delete this, and it should still run. Exactly, because we're not using those variables anymore. Next up, we could also say we want to save the current position of the mouse. So here we could say instead of current position, we could say mouse.current and set it to that place. Oh, now we get an error because current pos is not defined, because down here we access current pos. So mouse.current as well. And now let's see, we have the same functionality, but we also save the current position on here. Well, now you could say get mouse position. That's also kind of just relevant for this mouse. So why not also add the property on here? So we can add a function which is get position, which is a function, and it takes in an event and an element, and it does exactly what we do in here. Now when we say get position, we have to say mouse.get position, mouse.get position. Beautiful. And now we can remove that and we should be fine. Let's see if we get any errors. Mouse.get position, because it's not it's okay, mouse position, but it's just get position. Get position, get position. Okay, beautiful. Now we have it running and everything grouped up. Now we can go even a step further of saying, well, in our event listener, we should just call our mouse and tell it, hey, the mouse is being pressed down. Take care of whatever you need to take care. So we could add a function which is called set down function. And in here, we want to do everything we need to do when we press the mouse down. So do your thing. So what do we need to do? Well, when we press down, we want to say is pressed to true. And we also want to set the mouse down equals our current position. And our current position we will get somewhere from get position of our event and our element. Okay, so what do we need in here to make that happen? Well, first off, is pressed we can change like this. So if we want to access our own properties within an object, we can use the this word. So we can do this is pressed equals true. So that sets this element to true. And then if we also want to set the mouse down, the same thing, this dot down equals get position. And now we need the event and the element. So we can say event and element. And where do we get that? Well, we would need to get them as arguments. So we can do it like that. And say we want to get the event and element as a parameter, and then we'll do everything we need to do on this function. So here we can do set down and say event, which in our case still is just E, our event, and then canvas. And now we can remove this logic. And now we still have the same thing working. So we're telling mouse is, we just call this function, you take care of what you need to do. So we don't need to set the is pressed to true and need to think about all that functionality in our event listener. We say mouse object, take care of what you need to take care. We're just telling you we just set something down. And after that, we can use the mouse object and use the properties on the mouse object. Okay, so we would also need to have something for set up. So we can say set up function. Well, in the setup, what do we need as arguments? Well, so far here we just say the mouse is pressed, so we don't really need any arguments because we can just set this dot is pressed to false. So it's not being pressed anymore when we remove the down click once we release the mouse. And lastly, we could also change here to handle this part. Well, what do we really want to handle on the mouse here? On the mouse, we just want to set the position. So we would have set current function like that. And we want to say this dot current equals this dot get position of event and element. So what do we need to pass through? Event and element, and down here we then can just say mouse dot set current event and our element, which is the canvas. Beautiful. Let's save that, and now we have the same functionality running through, but our code is a little bit tidier. Oh, I forgot to say here mouse box set up. Now, are using all the functionality. So now we have the same functionality, but we exported our get position or mouse position within our object. We added some functionality and our properties, and we all have them on the mouse. Now, one more thing we can do is we could also save the mouse position when we release the mouse. That would be an option. So we could say up equals null, and then do when we up also set this dot up, because maybe you want to know where the mouse has been released, so we can also save that and say this dot get position again, like with the other ones, of event and element. Down here we would now need the event and say event and canvas, which is our element. Okay, and lastly, we could also extract those functions from within our event listeners. We could call this one handle mouse down. That would be our function. And we can just say handle mouse down like that. Here we can say handle mouse up, our function, our event handler, and pass that one in here. And down here we can say handle mouse move, and add the function up here and add it as an event listener on mouse move, as a function to execute on the event listener. And one last thing I would also do is I would move this mouse out of the if mouse is pressed, because generally we always want to set the current position, because these things, it's kind of logic we want to do when the mouse is pressed. But if we have an object and we say it has a current, we always want the current to be up to date, because otherwise, if I wouldn't press down, this set current wouldn't be executed if I would have the line within here. So that's it for refactoring this code and for creating an object to group all that functionality. So we still have a small bug in our program when we run it, and that's the one up here. Element is not defined, add object setup, and the problem is that we never define them as parameters in here. So we need to say event and element. And now it should clear that problem and we are up.